one of the reasons why we did this is we learned that a lot of these local retirement plans were investing their money, a piece of their portfolio in real estate, but they were investing it outside of the market. So if you go to a Fort Lauderdale, police and fire, let's say they had a percentage of their portfolio in real estate, and of the projects, 9 out of 10 were out of the state of Florida and out of the South Florida region. We kind of found that to be a little bit interesting, and we thought, well, listen, if we sit down with these guys and we understand and we tell them about what we do, and that they can put their retirement dollars to work in the communities that they serve, and they can help make an impact on the communities, not just from a redevelopment standpoint, but from a housing standpoint, which means their employees are going to be able to benefit from these projects. And they're going to be able to drive their contributors past a project and say, you guys own that.
I love it.
What a unique thing, right?
All right, Jeff. So I really want to know how you got your start into real estate.
Got my start on the banking side of the business. So out of school, I went to work for my father, who was in mortgage banking. And we were putting together primarily construction loans for large projects in the Midwest. I'm from Kansas City. And originally went to school at University of Missouri and moved back to Kansas City. And we were doing these large construction loans and actually syndicating them out to community banks. So it was a great way to learn the business because, we were underwriting different asset types and different development strategies and different markets, and it was a really great way to learn the business.
What was the name of the bank?
So BB Syndication Services, Inc.
That was like a big '08 thing, right? Because I think my dad was involved in banking at the same time as well.
Yep.
And we looked at a couple broken hotel deals that came out of that model where...
That's right.
He was on the board of a bank that owned one of these syndications.
Yes. So it was good in the sense that you have all these community banks, right? And you have to kind of understand the Midwest. I mean, you have these banks out in the middle of Iowa in a rural area, and they had really no way to diversify their local economy other than to make, they were making tractor loans and things like that. And so for them to have an opportunity to invest in a real estate deal, it was in a city that they would have never been otherwise able to compete on or have a piece of. It was good in that sense. It was bad in the sense that you did have a lot of, unsophisticated people involved in making or buying in on loans that they probably didn't know enough about.
And would you stay on to administer those loans, or would someone else handle the administration?
Yeah, someone else handled it. So we had a lead bank, and they would be the ones to administer the loans and service the loans. We were strictly in origination, so I would negotiate with a developer, go back to loan committee, get beat up a little bit, and then we make a deal, and then we were also involved in the syndication of it. So we would usually do an event where we would have a lot of these community bankers come in, do a luncheon or something, explain the merits of the deal, answer questions, and then we would open it up and they would either buy in or pass. And we would oversubscribe it because you'd always have a little bit of fallout. And that's how we do them. I think one of my first deals was like an $80 million construction loan.
Really?
Yeah.
It's kind of like syndicating your own real estate deals, but without any risk, and you could learn for free. So what were some of the big things you learned in the peak of this time?
Getting started it started in the banking business back in 2005 and 6 and 7, you saw
everything was good.
Yeah. I mean, you saw, groups like, Chorus Bank, who are out there doing 95% non-recourse loans on condo deals with no deposits, and you saw very reckless fundamentals. And from my perspective, and one of the things I was able to take advantage of was I was able to, you weren't just underwriting a deal. So you were underwriting a development strategy, and you were understanding that some of these developers were just literally shooting from the hip, and others were a lot more conservative, thoughtful, and long-term driven. And so it was from my standpoint, a tremendous way to not just learn what areas of the business I had an interest in, and eventually got into development by really learning a lot about the different asset classes and what might be a good strategy, but also what things to do and what things not to do as a developer.
Okay, so you're a banker. How do you get the itch to be an entrepreneur and get the guts to go out and actually do it?
Yeah. It happened a little bit by accident. I was up in Milwaukee. We were at the time, originating some business up in that area of the country, and I met a developer who had primarily done townhomes and kind of small condominium projects, and so met him, sat down, talked about a loan that they were doing. We decided to pass it. It was a condominium, high rise condominium loan. On the banking side, you saw things a little bit, ahead of everybody else.
What year? What time was this?
This was right around 2006.
Okay.
Yeah. So we were starting to, you were starting to see some indicators that maybe the market, particularly in the condominium sector, wasn't going to do well, and especially in secondary markets like Milwaukee. So we, decided to pass. Informed the developer, this was not something that was probably going to make a lot of sense. Long story short is he convinced me to basically partner up with him and take the deal from a condominium for sale strategy to a rental strategy. That's something that we were definitely more familiar with. And for me, I had always admired the ability to take something, a piece of raw land,
yep,
and create something out of nothing. And that creative aspect of development was something I was always very drawn to, and something I wasn't necessarily getting on the banking side of things. So that's where I started to shift over. I informed my dad I wanted to be a developer. Coming from, I know that you worked with you worked a lot with your father. And
yep.
There's a dynamic there.
Yep.
And he thought I was crazy. Of course, my father being in banking, naturally made him somewhat risk adverse, and but was very supportive as well, and encouraged me and helped me along the way. Was very instrumental in helping me get into the development side of the business. So.
And are you still partnered with this gentleman today, or
no? So he, Milwaukee guy. We did some projects up there and worked on some deals together, and really a terrific guy, really an innovative guy, somebody who I still keep in contact with. But we're not. Well, I guess we are still partnered on a project that we still own together, but aren't doing any new deals together.
So, at what point do you decide that you want to be in multifamily for rent? You had your experience with the condo side. Once you did the deal with this first guy, was it, okay, I'm sold on this asset class and this is where I want to spend my time?
Yes. Well, I would say that, well, let me back up and I'll tell you a little bit about that deal, because that deal was what really kind of drove our strategy and what we're doing today. The at the time, as you probably know, the development business was at an all-time high, and then of course it tanked. And we hit the Great Recession, and we had still not completed our deal or gotten our financing and started construction. This was a 30-story high-rise apartment tower in a market that in a part of town that was definitely kind of in the path of growth, but certainly not experienced very much investment or development activity prior to us It was, so you could say it was a pretty risky deal. So, of course, the Great Recession hits, banks aren't lending, and investors aren't investing. And so, in my banking side, my previous life as a banker, we had done a lot of deals that had included some sort of public finance component. So, if you take a cornfield out in the middle of Kansas, it's always going to be a cornfield unless you layer in incentives. And so I became very familiar with different public finance incentive programs, sales tax revenue bonds, STAR bonds is what they're called in the Midwest, and or TID, TIF, all kinds of different tax incentive strategies, to help a deal that would otherwise be infeasible and help it become feasible. And so when I got involved in the development side of the business on this project, which was an apartment deal, we were kind of taken aback because there weren't banks out there that were really very interested in lending to a guy with no experience and a guy with very limited experience. Two young guys who were looking to do a very bold project.
Did you own the land at that time?
And we own the land.
Okay.
And so we got creative. And so, I kind of went to my partner and said, listen, I think if we go to the city and we work with them on some financing incentives, we might be able to pull this off. We're also going to go to the federal government. We're going to work on what's called a HUD 221 D4 loan, which is a government insured product. It was, not commonly used, especially on a project of this size. And then on the equity side, we were fortunate enough. We had a partner, our third partner, or I guess it was me and two other guys, but our third partner, a guy named Tan Low, and Tan comes from a well-to-do family in Hong Kong, and at that time, a lot of folks over there were looking to get their money out of the country and invest in U.S. real estate. So, what ultimately ended up happening was we worked with the city. We were able to structure a $9.3 million TIF, which helped us obviously kind of bridge the gap of feasibility. We did about a $42.5 million HUD 221 D4 loan. The AFL-CIO, the union pension out of DC, was our Ginnie Mae investor, which helped us obviously politically and really helped us from a construction standpoint as well. And then raise the rest out of Hong Kong. So we were explaining TIF and HUD to wealthy Hong Kong investors, and you can only imagine, how that went, but we got it done. So.
And what was the leverage on that deal, like approximately?
Well,
is it high leverage or low leverage?
Very high, very high. Comparative to that time, it was low leverage, right?
Right. But
today, it's very high leverage. I would say that we were probably in the 70 range, probably 75. The HUD loan is a 40-year fixed non-recourse product.
Does that exist today?
It does. It does. Generally, they're going to underwrite to about 120 debt service coverage ratio. But with a 40-year term, you can afford to do a little bit more leverage. It's not an easy loan to get. That's not an easy product. Working your way through the HUD process, you certainly have to have patience and you got to know what you're doing.
Is it more about patience, less about qualification? So if you're willing to grind through it, you can get the loan with limited track record?
No, I mean, listen, I will say this. It's very much about qualifications. At that time, while we didn't have a tremendous amount of experience, or I didn't have really any experience, my partner had very limited, we didn't have a tremendous amount of money. I had almost no money. At that time, we looked pretty good because borrowers had a line of banks chasing them everywhere.
Yep.
And so HUD at that time was very focused on, making sure that, guys weren't getting ready to file for bankruptcy when they were applying for their loans. So we looked actually pretty good on paper compared to a lot of those guys. Track record wise, we didn't have a tremendous amount of experience, but we had a good general contractor, and that made a big difference to them. We had a good solid game plan. We had the city involvement. That makes a difference when you're dealing with government insured programs. They like to see that other governments are involved in helping you incentivize development. And we had the unions behind us, which was, in that part of the country is very helpful.
So in your strategy today, are you still using these types of HUD loans?
We are. Well, we haven't done a D4 product, but we have applied and we have been granted invitation letters to go and do those deals. They generally they take quite a while. They take a long time. And time is money and risk and all that. So we haven't closed on a 221 D4, but we have closed on a 223F, which is a very similar government program. That's a takeout loan. And we're doing quite a bit of those, just because we understand them, we understand the product, and we've worked with, we've got an experience of working with HUD and going through it. So we are still doing some of that. Yeah.
So in these markets that you're operating in now or back then, how do you go about even figuring out how do you know if a city wants to just give away free money to guys who are looking to build units in their town? How do you go about finding those cities and those programs?
Well, so what I'll tell you is with the cities, it's you got to identify cities that have the need, right? So that's the first thing we do is we look at a market that really needs this type of product. Right now, I mean, workforce housing is getting a significant amount of press and attention. I think I heard the other day that governors are now making it one of their top 3 priorities in a lot of these states. Mayors, it's their number 1 priority, and more times than not in certain cities. So it's gaining recognition. Not just for a while. It was just this part of Florida. It was South Florida. It was a South Florida issue.
Hot market, big rents.
Yeah, big rents, and then it became, hey, Tampa's got a workforce housing issue, and Orlando's got it. And now Jacksonville, and now you go just about anywhere in the state of Florida, and people are really feeling it. And really, I don't think it resonates until it hits home with people, and people really start to, have kids that graduate and are struggling to find a decent place to live at a reasonable cost. And so that's all started to happen. So, going back to your question, we identify and target areas that we can make the greatest amount of impact. And so we look for areas that have where the major employment centers are. We look for jobs. That's probably the number one thing. We look for the natural progression of growth. We look for cities that are either on the kind of cusp of really growing or have experienced a tremendous amount of rapid growth, because that's usually where a lot of that disparity lies. And we look for other high cost housing. I want to be right next to the deal who's, the guy who's getting $4,000 a month in rent, because we can come in and offer that same unit at $2,100 a month. We're making a big difference. We're making a big impact. So we start there. And then you also have to understand and really be knowledgeable on not what programs are available, what tools you can utilize in some of these cities. Some of these cities have a lot more money than others, and have some of them have programs that are established. I would say more times than not, we're involved in helping create an incentive program on a local level that we then go ahead and utilize. And so it's about kind of thinking outside of the box, not relying on programs that are currently in place, but going in and sitting down. They call it a public-private partnership for a reason. You sit down at the table with them, you come up with solutions that work both for them and for us, and then that's how we've been able to accomplish some of these deals.
Okay, so break down. Maybe you can't give away all your secrets, but break down how that works. Pick any city that you go into. You just call up the city manager and you're like, "Hey, I think you guys have a housing shortage. I'd like to talk to you about some incentives on how does that work? Do you have to bring in a lobbyist? Like, do you go to these big commission meetings? Is it like closed doors? What does that look like?
Well, so when I first got into development, I was living here. So in 2010, when we finally got the project going in the Midwest, I'd moved down here with my wife
To Fort Lauderdale.
Fort Lauderdale, and we'd moved here just for it was a beautiful place to live, high quality.
You're ahead
of
of the
life.
game.
Yeah, all the reasons why everybody's moved down here and stayed. And so it took a while, but I did two things. I developed relationships organically, right? So I got to know a lot of the city officials just because I was living here and I was interested in what was going on with these different cities and some of the challenges they were facing and so on and so forth. But I was also able to educate myself on the market. In the market, as you know, in the multifamily space, in the multifamily rental space, there's two types of developers. There's the market rate housing guys, and then there's the affordable housing guys and the tax credit guys. Those guys are out there fulfilling a need. Tax credit space, they're working with Florida Housing Finance Corp on various, 4 or 9% deals. That's generally how they're doing their projects, and it's a huge need, and very, very capable players out there doing that. There's the market rate housing guys. But what we learned was there really isn't anybody in between, right? And if you want to spend, $1,700, $1,800, $1,900 a month on an apartment and you live in Fort Lauderdale, you're probably going to be, guided to a project that's a 2-story old motel style building with a window unit, surface parking, no amenities, right? And so, so we realized that there was a need, and starting out, we had to educate a lot of these cities what that need was and what that meant, and be very careful about that and thoughtful about that, because sometimes when you go into communities and you start talking about workforce housing, you automatically get, they're building Section 8 housing in my community, and it's going to come along with various,
So what does workforce mean to you then? Like, what is that classification?
Yeah. So, workforce, the state statute says that workforce housing is between the 80% of AMI and 120% of AMI. Now in South Florida and other markets here in the state, they've taken that, a 120 and they've raised it to 140. In some instances, they've actually raised it a little bit beyond that. But really what it means is housing for moderate and middle income families and households. And these are folks that have making a great wage. They're contributing significantly towards society, and really, not to kind of steal the term from during COVID, but they said the essential employees and essential workers and all this. These are folks that we rely on as a community.
So it's not the laptop class.
So
these are just the normal working people in every city doing the jobs that we all need.
It's wide ranging. So if you look at one of our projects, you're going to see everybody from nurses, of course, who you would think, right? Nurses and police officers and teachers and firefighters, those folks. It's entry-level business owners, small business owners, entry-level corporate positions, young attorneys, obviously healthcare. We have a lot of healthcare workers in here, and that's something we're working very closely with certain hospital districts on trying to figure out how to accommodate their needs a little bit more, because they struggle with that. But it's across the board. Insurance, people that work in the insurance industry, and of course recently, more and more folks that work remotely, and people that have moved here from California and Illinois and New York and some of these places, that they still, maybe they work for Microsoft, right? But these are folks that can make 6 figures, and they're spending 50-60% of their income on housing. It's crazy. And so our job is to go out there, build Class A luxury product, offer them an experience that they can get where they're spending twice as much, but give them a rent that they can afford. And generally speaking, one of the things that we've had to educate a lot of these cities on very early on, but still to this day is what that translates to in terms of the creation of economic development. Because you have folks right now, if they're spending 60% of their income on housing, have very little money to go out and go to restaurants and do things that help feed the local economy. If we're able to take that from 60% down to 30%, and that resident has more money in their pocket, and what are they going to do? They're going to go to the restaurants and they're going to go spend money in the community, and that's what we want. And it has an impact on traffic. Being a developer, one of the things you hear from just about every neighborhood group out there is traffic.
Yep.
And especially in a fast-growing city like Fort Lauderdale. Well, if you're able to house your workforce where they work, and they're not having to, get in their cars every day and drive to I-95 and then drive, to a less costly community, it's going to eliminate a tremendous amount of traffic congestion.
So I'm learning something new. So basically what you're saying is you're building not what I would consider low income housing, which is limited amenities, pretty basic functional housing. You're building effectively Class A product, but you're able to rent it for less because you're getting subsidized by the government. Is that how to think about it?
Absolutely. If I take you through our projects, Jake, and I'll put our deals up against any other project out there. So if I take you through it, you're gonna get what you expect in any other Class A luxury community in the city. And so our product is just the same as a market rate community, luxury market rate community. What we do is we structure these incentives, and then we are required, on a deal by deal basis, depending on ultimately what the set asides are. But we're required to keep a portion of that building at a certain rent level, not to exceed, and at a certain income level, not to exceed. So all of our projects are mixed income. So they all have a market rate component. They all have market rate units. The purpose of that is because you don't want to stigmatize the property by saying that it's restricted. I would venture to say that in just about all of our projects, people that live there have no idea that there's even a restriction in place. So if you lease it and manage it accordingly, that tenant doesn't even know that there is a restriction in place through the government. But there is, and so you're on average, if you're that tenant, you're getting anywhere between a 20 and 35% discount to market, which is substantial, and it helps people's, helps their lifestyles and for us, it's a way for us to be able to, do what we love doing, which is development. The creative aspect of development is so much fun, creating these communities and experience in a development project, but do it while we're actually, helping people and helping families afford to live, in these cities.
So what kind of incentives then are you getting from the cities? Is it debt? Are they subsidizing the rent once the unit is open, fully operating? How does that look?
Well, so it's cities and counties.
Okay.
Tax incentives. So, sometimes we'll do a TIF, where we pay our real estate taxes. We get a portion of that back.
Got it.
Refunded to us. There's grant dollars through CRAs. We work with the county, on certain programs. We're actually working with Broward County currently on a new program that we're hoping to roll out on a 400 unit project that we have here in Fort Lauderdale. We're worked with Palm Beach County on the Workforce Housing Exchange Program. Very unique program, and I actually partnered with JL Homes on a particular deal where we were able to basically take on their workforce housing obligations. So they were able to receive certain density bonuses by agreeing to do workforce housing. That's necessarily didn't fit within their model on this particular development project. So we were able to assume their obligation and build those units. And we took a payment from them in order to do that, and that was a way of providing gap funding for that deal. I would say there's one project in Palm Beach County. I mean, I think we have 5 different incentive programs.
Wow.
We have some infrastructure bonds, we have NSP dollars, we have some exchange dollars, we got some CRA TIF, some some grant dollars. We just get creative, and that's what we've been successful doing. And again, we work a lot of times on the front side of developing a lot of this policy with cities and with counties, and we don't mind being the being the first ones out, and being the group that works with them to develop the policy, but also implement it for the first time.
So riches are usually in the niches, but why do you think in your market it is such a niche, and a lot of developers, big multifamily developers throughout the country, tend to focus on just market rent, Class A? Why don't you have more competition in your space?
I probably get that question, more than any other question. I think it's because, as I explained, there's the market rate guys and there's the tax credit guys. Tax credit is it's a very process driven business. There are rules. You better know those rules. You follow those rules to a T, and if you don't, you get DQ'd. It's a very rule driven business. And that process, and those guys that understand that very, very much. And they understand how to work that process and how to get it to work for their benefit. Outside of the box type stuff is generally not what they're accustomed to doing. And so I think that a lot of them don't get into it because they have their rules. The rules have been in place a long time, and quite frankly, they've figured out a way to make a lot of money on those rules. And that's why they focus on that. On the market rate side, the housing space is very complicated. When you start talking about negotiating and structuring incentives, it's not as simple as just saying, well, this is what we're going to do. It's understanding how banks are going to treat it. It's understanding how investors are going to look at this. It's knowing how to put these programs in place so that it works for the private equity model. And then also on the compliance side of things, when you're managing, when you're leasing, I mean, it's very, very different from a market rate product. Our goal is to make it so that the tenant doesn't feel like, their experience is not that it's any different than going to a market rate. But I can tell you behind the scenes, it's very different.
Really?
And oh yeah. And
what's different about it?
The way you income qualify people, the way that we market, and we make sure that people are fitting within the income class that they qualify for.
So do you have some people that have a much higher income that are trying to get?
Absolutely. They hear that, oh man, I know so-and-so and they got a unit for $1,800 a month. I want that unit, and we tell them, okay, give us some of your information. And if they make too much, then we let them know that, we don't have anything in that price point that's available for them, but we steer them to a unit that hopefully works for them. But it's very intensive, both on the front side, getting a deal closed. It's intensive, and just from a management and compliance standpoint.
So what's the chicken and the egg kind of story in your world? If you're going into a new market, mm-hmm. You mentioned you're in Palm Beach. Let's take a new market that you don't have any investment. Are you finding the land, tying it up, and then going to the city and figuring out what you can do? Or are you first going to the city, trying to structure a deal, and then maybe finding a piece of land?
No. Good question. We're finding a piece of land. We know generally what works and what doesn't work. We also have a general understanding of what might be available from a gap funding perspective, or what kind of programs we might be able to utilize. A lot of that's just done, based upon our experience of doing, 10 plus, public-private partnership deals with various cities. So, and so we'll go tie up that piece of property. and then we'll sit down. And where there's a will, there's a way, right? And so usually we're meeting with city leadership very, very at the very, very beginning. One of the unique things about our company is that we have in-house architecture and interior design.
Really?
So we can move very, very quickly in terms of putting a project together and putting our materials together, and that helps. Especially if certain land sellers got you on a tight or on a short fuse. We can move pretty quickly. But we sit down and we look to basically understand right off the bat, is there a desire? And if there's a will, there will be a way. We will figure out a way. We're creative guys, and we've got a track record of being able to, structure certain things that work for us. Now, it's important to also note that our projects are not just about housing and workforce housing. One of the large pieces of our business is redevelopment, right? And going into areas that are traditionally underserved and being incentivized because we're first movers in areas. And a good example of that is a project you probably know that we did here in Fort Lauderdale called the 613.
Yes.
So west of the tracks on Sistrunk, historic Northwest here in Fort Lauderdale, has certainly, not experienced the same amount of investment and growth as other parts of the city. The train tracks have certainly been the dividing line for a period of time between African American and rest of the community, and I think that that's another key component of our business is we try to identify projects that not just where we can go in and fulfill a housing need, but where we can go in and actually accomplish a significant redevelopment project that's going to help boost an area that might be otherwise, sitting in the same place, several years down the road if we had not gone in and made a tremendous investment. So
development's so hard, and I always think about how fun it is to build something.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to have the vision. You got to convince other people of that vision. You got to tie up the land. You are very experienced in developing complicated deals. So what have you found to be the best way to get a piece of land under contract? Are you closing? Are you just keeping an option on it until you get all your approvals and all the incentives done? How does that process work at Affiliated now?
So I would tell you that 90+% of the sites that we purchase are off market. I found that if you just drive a market and you get out of your car and you go up and you knock on somebody's door, or you wander around their business, somebody's eventually going to come out and talk to you. We purchased most of our property doing that.
Just driving around, like through the broker network, or literally you guys in your office?
Us.
And you writing letters, calling, knocking on doors?
Yeah,
what are you doing?
Amazing. What's the on Google, the little guy you drop down and you walk down the street? I mean, that guy's key, because you get, you walk him down the street and you'll see a sign, usually maybe somebody's business or something. And then, you call on him, you just cold call him, or you show up. One time we walked into a church and the pastor was sitting there, kind of in the lobby, and we walked up to him and we said, "Hey, listen, we're not brokers. We're buyers. Would you be interested in selling us your property?" And so that's how we've had the greatest amount of success doing it. We work with brokers as well, and brokers bring us property. But we're pretty scrappy land buyers. More times than not, we're going in and changing the zoning, or going in and doing a PUD or something that allows us to do what is not currently zoned for. And so, listen, you try to get as long of a contract as you can. In some markets that works, in some markets, you're less successful in terms of getting people to give you a bunch of time. I would say the market we're heading into is going to become more and more of a buyer's market, where it's been a seller's market, as you know, for a long time. It's been really, really difficult finding reasonably priced land.
So if it's a buyer's market, where historically has your equity come from, and where do you think you're trending now in terms of your capital partners? Are those institutionals? Are you syndicating out high net worth family office? What does that look like?
So good question. So in 2000, let's see, that would be 2021. We closed, my partner and I, Nick, we closed on a $125 million just fully discretionary fund.
Really? That's awesome.
Yeah, we're in the fund business. That would be our first fund that we've raised. Our investors are primarily comprised of public pension plans. So we have a lot of police, fire, and general employee pension plans. Everything from Miami Beach all the way up to St. Augustine. We have 14 different plans invested with us currently. We also have close family office relationships, and a couple in particular that we work very closely with on deals. And so it gives us a lot of flexibility. There's deals that we've done entirely with the fund, and there's deals where the fund takes a percentage, and we'll bring in one of our family office relationships to take a portion of as well. So that's given us a tremendous amount of leverage when you're going in and buying, not just buying land, but when you're going in and you're working with these cities, you can look them straight in the eye and say, we have our equity needed to close on this deal, and we're going to close. And so that's been a huge thing for us, especially I think the market we're heading into. That capital is becoming more and more difficult for folks, and there's very established developers out there that are having a difficult time raising capital. But so that's something we're looking to leverage, going forward and on new projects.
So I want to hang there for a bit and just talk about the fund business, running a real estate private equity firm, which you have with discretionary capital. First time fund of 125 million is incredibly impressive. So how did you raise that money with all these public entities? Is that because you do what you do? Did you hire an advisor? It's not easy for a first fund.
No, it's not easy. In fact, everybody, we were kicking around the idea at the beginning, and everybody said, you're not going to be able to do this.
Right.
There's very, established companies have been trying this for years. And I would say it's a little bit of everything. So number one, we kind of targeted this unique approach of partnering with local pension plans. And one of the reasons why we did this is we learned that a lot of these local retirement plans were investing their money, a piece of their portfolio in real estate, but they were investing it outside of the market. So if you go to a Fort Lauderdale, police and fire, for instance, and I have no idea if this is the case or not, but let's say they had a percentage of their portfolio in real estate, and of the projects, 9 out of 10 were out of the state of Florida and out of the South Florida region. Well, we kind of found that to be a little bit interesting, and we thought, well, listen, if we sit down with these guys and we understand and we tell them about what we do, and that they can put their retirement dollars to work in the communities that they serve, and they can help make an impact on the communities, not just from a redevelopment standpoint, but from a housing standpoint, which means their employees are going to be able to benefit from these projects. And they're going to be able to drive their contributors past a project and say, you guys own that.
I love it.
What a unique thing, right? And so that became, our approach. And we started working with guys that are close, with certain plans, and kind of started, testing that out to see if that was going to resonate. It did, but I will tell you, it's very, 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 very hard. And, all of these pension plans have gatekeepers. They have their consultants.
Right.
Their consultants don't want to underwrite affiliated. They they want to underwrite Morgan Stanley, right? Or they want to underwrite
Related.
Related, certainly a more established institutional grade type of developer, and that just wasn't us, and so it was very, very difficult. And I'm going to give a lot of credit to my business partner, Nick Rojo. I mean, he really was out front taking the lead on this initiative and was relentless and just making sure that we did it right, we followed through, and we stayed in front of people. And eventually we were able to knock down one, knock down two. Once you do that, then it becomes a little easier. And so we're incredibly fortunate, from our perspective too. It puts a great deal of onus on what we're doing. We have these, these local funds that are invested with us and believe in what we're doing, and so that we have a lot of weight on our shoulders because of that, and take that responsibility very seriously.
What would surprise folks most about running a first-time $100 million plus discretionary fund that you didn't realize at the beginning?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think people would probably expect it to be difficult, and for the compliance aspect of things to be very challenging, and all. But I would say that what would surprise people the most is that once you follow through and you do what you say you're going to do, and you demonstrate to them that they made a good decision, right? And that you're able to deliver the types of returns that you said you were going to be able to deliver, and that you're able to follow through on the promises that you made. And when you can bring them through a project that you develop and say, look, this is what we did together, that experience, makes being in the fund business much, much more enjoyable, because you're under a great deal of scrutiny at the very beginning, and there's a lot of people doubting you, and there's a lot of people trying to poke holes in your program and everything. But once you're able to follow through and do that, I think people would be very surprised that the tone changes a little bit, and it becomes a little bit easier to get things done in that space.
So what does a perfect site look for you then? Like what is that site? Like, what are the parameters of a perfect site?
Employment centers. We want to be close to other high cost housing. We love being close to public transportation. I would say right now, if you jumped on the Bright Line in Miami and took it up to Orlando, you'd pass all of our sites. I'd be able to point them all out to you.
Got to put some Brightline stations there.
Exactly. That's the hope. No, we're big believers in that. I think more and more people are looking for convenience and not wanting to get in their cars. The average workforce renter commutes 30 minutes in each direction every day.
Have you found that having the fund has enabled you to tie up sites or get access to sites that you wouldn't have gotten if you didn't have the fund, and you had to go syndicate it out or raise capital deal by deal?
So, certainly, we're able to be a lot more competitive. If you're a land seller and that your buyer is going to have to go sell the dream to an equity investor, you're probably a little bit less likely to come to an agreement, or at least bend on certain terms. I think that we're able to get in, demonstrate, listen, we have the ability to close, and that gives people confidence.
What is the typical timeline from when you identify one of these deals, taking it through design, construction, lease up? How long does that take? Is it longer than market rent, or is it about the same?
Well, it's about the same. A lot of times we're going in and changing the zoning and doing all that. So that takes some time. Certainly working on our gap funding packet, our gap funding approvals. Sometimes we got to go put together an entire strategy with the city or some kind of policy ahead of actually implementing it. So that can take some time. I would say on average, anywhere from 18 to 24 months is generally where we're going to fall in the bigger cities. Certain cities, we've built 2 projects in Lake Worth Beach. 230 units and another 200 unit project. And we were able to move pretty quickly. That city's very, very receptive to development. And, we were able to move much, much quicker than that. Other cities, you know how it is. You go down to the building department and they lose your plans half the time. And
it's amazing how much they need housing, but how slow they are to actually put an effort towards getting that housing.
Absolutely. I mean, the regulatory environment, unfortunately, I've found not to be very different. If you go down to the building department, the same set of rules and regulations that a market rate guy has to follow is the same set of rules and regulations a workforce guy has to follow. And to me, that's the problem, right? We have all these challenges put up in front. I'm dealing with the same challenge that all the market rate guys are dealing with: land availability, construction costs, interest rates, insurance. All that stuff is relevant in that world. The regulatory environment's the same thing, and that's something that could change. I mean, that's something these cities have the ability, and the counties have the ability to go out and change. And certain times they'll say, they'll streamline or they'll fast track a deal, and certainly in certain cities when leadership gets involved, and that definitely helps pushing things along. I can tell you, in a lot of the cities we've worked with, when leadership gets involved and said, this is a project that's important to us because it's housing and we need it, it'll move things along a little bit quicker, but it can certainly improve.
I want to focus on the development side a little bit. So you mentioned you have your own in-house architecture and interior design. Are you using those folks to actually be the architect of record on your project? Or are they more of a liaison, can do side projects, internal projects, but you're outsourcing that work to someone else?
Yeah. So what we've done, we're not stamping the plans. We don't take on that risk. Building falls down.
You don't want that.
We don't want that, right? So and we don't have the licenses and all that. So I say in-house. It's not exactly what you would think, but we've got a firm. Actually, I started working with up in Milwaukee. My very first project. And so I've the owner of the firm, Matt Rinka, is somebody who I was in the trenches with, back in the day, understands our program, is a very, very talented architect. When I met him, he had maybe one other employee working for him. It was the beginning of my career, and we both kind of rose up in the industry together. He's now got a firm of 50, 60 plus architects, one of the most talented firms in the Midwest. There became a time where we got a little bit frustrated with both the pace and the quality of the work product that was coming out of firms in South Florida. Listen, a lot of these firms have been, very overwhelmed with business, and good for them. They're making a lot of money and doing a lot of great projects, but work product wasn't that we expected. And you know how important that is when you're under construction on a project. Your plans better be on point and well detailed. And quite frankly, it's important too, the pace in which you're getting things done, especially if you're doing public-private partnerships and you need to move quickly on certain things. Getting our work product done quickly and getting it done right is imperative. And we've worked with good firms down here, but we ultimately decided that it would be much more advantageous for us to control that whole process internally. And so what I did was I went to my old pal, Matt, and I said, listen, I know that you're looking to, break into the South Florida market. And I wouldn't otherwise give an out-of-town developer or out-of-town architect an opportunity here because, the regulatory environment,
it's hard.
Knowing these city planners and what they do and, is a very, very important aspect of this. But what we did was a little bit different than that. I said, listen, we've got a huge pipeline of business. We're doing a lot, so much so that we need full-time people. I said, you build a team that is solely dedicated to our business and our product. And we're going to create processes and we're going to create work product that is we're not going to recreate the wheel on every deal, right? What we do is what we do. In fact, a lot of the the units that we utilize on one project, we'll just throw that unit down.
Meaning the layout. The outside might look different, but the 2-bedroom, the 1-bedroom, the studio, they all look the same. And you guys have fine-tuned that to where it's perfection.
Exactly. So, amenities, the feeling of it, but you don't go, what you do in one city doesn't necessarily translate to another city. And so one of the things we're very proud of is when we go to a city, we tailor that development towards the unique attributes of that particular community that we're in. Well, so we do it a little different on each deal, but ultimately the building blocks are the same, right? And the structure, MEP, roofing systems, windows, all that stuff that make up the majority of your line item on your budget on a schedule of values is relatively the same, right? And what I was learning was we were unfortunately dealing with repeat business in the design field, but they were handing it off to different people, and that wasn't translating.
Yep.
And so I was getting a unit lighting plan on on an identical floor plan that was very different than what I had done previously. And I said, this is ridiculous. We got to figure out a way to do this a little bit better. So I went to Matt and I said, listen, you build a team down here. They have to be located in South Florida. They have to know and understand, each city and city planner and what they look for and all that. And we'll hire locally. And just build a team around our business. But it can all be done under your umbrella, and ultimately, your quality control and your processes and stuff is going to be, how you run that aspect of the business. But we are effectively going to collaborate, and that allows us to be a lot more hands-on. It allows us to make very rapid decisions. The market's always changing, and you're either evolving with it or you're doing stuff that's outdated and being left behind. So it's given us some advantages. And I'll let you know, check back with me a couple of years from now.
Sounds pretty cool.
Ultimately if it does what we're hoping it'll do. But
how does that inform your thinking around construction costs and budgeting? Are you also working with one GC that you're basically farming all your business to, that enables you to underwrite a deal quicker than most others because you kind of have a standardized floor plan, what it costs because you're constantly doing this stuff? What does that side of the construction budgeting process look like?
Yeah. We have done, I would say, the majority of our projects with Moss Construction.
Scott was on the podcast.
Yeah.
He's like one of the smartest guys I know. Amazing.
I'll say this. Listen, the Moss family is they're the best in the business for a reason. It starts at the top. It starts with people. This. This is a people industry, and relationships are the most important thing in our business. They take on a similar approach, very similar culture that we have, which is we're in it for the long haul, and I think, we talked a little bit before we started. I've never had to pull my contract out with Moss and look at it and say, well, this is what it says. There's challenges and there's issues and there's times where we're, disagreeing on certain things, but we sit down and we work through it together. And sometimes we give a little bit, and sometimes they give a little bit. Ultimately, the goal is you don't make money at my expense and I don't make money at your expense, because we're all in this to make money. We're all in this to be successful and feed our families and make sure that we build a company that we can all be proud of. And they take on that similar approach. And so it's been a very good partnership. And one of the things that we've done with them is we have standardized not just our process, but our product. And really, ultimately, what it does is it reduces risk exposure from their standpoint and from our standpoint. They don't have to wonder what kind of materials we're going to select, and they don't have to wonder what our expectations are in terms of finishes. We just got done punching out a 309 unit deal up in West Palm Beach called the Grand, and they already know what our expectations are. A lot of these guys when I walk on a construction site, I see the same guy that was working on our previous 4 projects.
Awesome.
And they know us, and they know, you go to an OAC meeting, they already know how we're going to respond before we respond. Right. And so it makes those meetings pretty brief at times, and so we've been able to create that. Now we are obviously branching out of South Florida. We're starting to look at some markets up in the Space Coast in Orlando and Tampa and down into Fort Myers, so I think we are going to have to, create this, similar type of structure with others. But I can tell you that that's how we've done it with Moss, and it's worked well for us. And
a lot of people in real estate, particularly in South Florida, I think, underestimate the value of relationships. And it's so important because real estate is so hard. Everyone glamorizes it and makes it look so easy and so fun, but it is fucking hard every single day. And if you have a great relationship that can save you here and save you there, and it's one less thing that you have to not worry about, but stress over, or be concerned that you're going to have a problem at the end of the day, it allows you to focus on what you're actually in it for. And that's the business of making money and providing, housing for families and fulfilling your mission.
Absolutely. It's our job as developers is to manage risk and fiduciaries, right? Our job is to manage risk and repeat business, dealing with the same people, same procedures. That's one very good way to do that.
So I had Evan Schlecker from Morgan on the podcast, and God bless these guys. They have like 15 to 20 development projects going on at one time. They have their own GC, their own construction group.
Right. Yep.
That is a tremendous responsibility to keep that beast and that machine going. Have you ever thought about bringing construction in-house, or do you like working with a third party but having this close relationship where it feels like they're in-house, like the architect, but they're really not?
Right. No, I don't think I have any interest in being in the construction business.
Neither do I. Leave it to Scott.
We've got enough to worry about, and I'll tell you, construction is it's a challenging business. And I can tell you, just in these past, 5 years, what have we experienced? Tariffs,
right?
A pandemic, supply material shortages. Now we're going to be dealing with labor, issues. It's always something. It's always something. And, development's hard enough. I think our job as developers is to hire the best in the business, rely on people, hold them accountable, but also give people a tremendous amount of leeway to go do what they're really good at doing. And so, that's our approach. I don't think we have any interest. Now, with that being said, we are involved, and we're heavily involved in the construction process. But we do a lot on the front side. We work really, really hard with Moss, probably more so, than most of their clients on the front side. What I mean by that is before we sign a GMP, before we start construction, we're at 100% plans. We're on a 100% permitted set of plans. We've gone through the qualifications. We've gone through every single thing that's going to be in that.
Including your interior finishes and fit out.
Absolutely. Because once we get going, my resources are not best spent being on the job site every day and selecting materials and fighting over, design clarifications and all that. Our time is best spent doing development, and so we turn it over.
So, do you think it's best then to, on a project, pump the brakes a little bit? Wait till you literally have 100% plans, not maybe 90% plans, actual real 100% plans. Get a firm GMP that is only subject to legitimate ads that you were doing and not things that maybe you thought were in the plans and they would have assumed and they didn't, whatever. Is that what you've learned to be the best practice as a developer?
Yeah. I mean, it works for us. If you're a condominium guy, that's really hard to do because there's so many changes that you're making throughout based upon your buyers and so on and so. That's a whole different business model. In our business model, we found that to be the most advantageous from the standpoint of mitigating risk and using our resources wisely.
Do you do any design build, or is it mostly you're engineering the MEP and they're subbing it out, or do you do a lot of design build MEP?
Well, no, we do some of that in the sense that we like, we're relationship guys. A lot of these subcontractors that do right by us, we want to work with them again, and so in some respects, we'll give certain subs an opportunity to really get in kind of from the beginning and help us. Naturally, they're going to be the most competitive anyways. Of course, we need to make sure that, we'll definitely, go out to market and make sure that they are being competitive. But if the more involved they are in the design and the more they have their heads into a deal, naturally, the more competitive they're going to be.
I want to talk a little bit about how you're underwriting these deals. Do you have a very set formula, a box, and spend most of your time focusing on getting the incentives? Or is the underwriting very different for each deal and you're having to tweak a lot of different variables?
Yep.
And then also, where are you getting your data from? Like, how do you know what the I don't know, what do you call it? The subsidized or the affordable portion is versus the market rent?
Mm-hmm.
How do you figure that out? And then how do you roll that all into your underwriting?
Yep.
And then I guess what I'm really asking is also, what do your returns look like compared to a typical market rent guy?
So I would tell you that from a capitalization standpoint, sources and uses standpoint, our deals are relatively the same across the board. The gap funding portion of it is always different. It's on a case-by-case basis. Depends what municipality we're in, what our, potential sources of gap funding revenues are, and so on and so forth.
And when you say gap funding, what does that mean?
That means our subsidies, our incentives. So that's always different. But
it's basically raising less equity because you're just putting in money from someone else, right?
It is. It certainly requires you to raise less equity on a project. But I would say within, when we're doing a test fit, which is, you show me a piece of property and you say, all right, Jeff, here's a piece of property. What do you think you can do? That same day, I'll have sources and uses put together on the project. We'll have a pretty good understanding of what type incentives we might be able to layer in and accomplish, and how we're going to capitalize the project. And I'll tell you, from that point until the day that we close, you'd be surprised how spot on we are when we look at a deal. So generally from the very, very beginning, we're looking at that, and we've got a good understanding of what that's going to look like. Returns wise, a big thing in the business these days is impact capital, impact investors. Certainly there's endowments and foundations, certain groups out there that are doing a really good job attracting lower cost capital in the affordable and workforce housing space. I can tell you that's something that, people are very heavily involved in the industry are all trying to get figured out. Unfortunately, what we found is that investors are still expecting the same types of returns on workforce deals, on deals that have that ESG component to them, that they are on market rate deals. And so the expectation from an investor is similar that you would see on the market rates. That it really doesn't change.
And your waterfall in terms of promotes and all that kind of stuff is the same.
Yeah, they're the same. I mean, we're doing market rate stuff now. I think that's changing. That's going to change. There's certainly groups like Turner Impact Capital and stuff like that are out there, and they've figured out a way to do it. There's other groups that are being innovative in terms of ways to figure it out and doing projects with not for profits and stuff like that. But capitalization is what you would see on any typical market rate type of project.
So what kind of returns are you targeting on deals today?
I would say mid to high teens.
IRR.
Yeah, IRR.
And then what does your hold period look like?
Well, so that's what sets us apart a little bit. So we're generally long-term hold guys. So I would say, probably 90% of the people in the multifamily industry are merchant builders,
Yep.
right? Maybe more. To this day, we've never sold a project. We own all of our assets. We our objective, and it comes by virtue of investing in some of these markets that are within the natural progression of growth, right? We're not really going to be able to do our best within the first 3 years, but maybe year 7, 8, 9, 10, it starts to look more attractive in some of these areas as things, pop up around it. So we're longer term hold guys, and our return profile is similar to what you would see.
Okay, so I want to get into it now because I like the longer term hold model, because the reality is, even in my business, I've had some hotels that I sell because I feel like it's a good time to sell.
Yeah.
I want to get into my promote.
Right.
We said we were going to hold the deal for 3 to 5 years.
Yes.
And I'm selling. But I know, because this is great real estate, over time, this thing's going to be worth more than what I'm selling it for today if I would have held it for another 5 or 10 years. How do you structure your incentives with your investors so that you, as the GP, the sponsor, can make money, but then still hold it for 10 years, 20 years, however long you're holding it for?
Yeah. So we have we have a couple different strategies. Well, number one, by virtue of what we do, workforce housing, we do qualify for certain financing that's generally a little bit more attractive on the secondary market than the market rate guys would. So there are certainly times that we're able to, and we take on, lower leverage. We're not the guys that lever up. We don't do the whole debt fund, try to get it up to 80 thing. I value my sleep.
Not worth it. Yeah. Because those guys are coming for your workforce housing. They don't want to be a lender. They want to be a developer.
Yeah. We're fine in that kind of 60% range. But so, a lot of times we'll come back in once we've been able to get the project built and all that. And a lot of times our refinancing, is big enough to be able to give investors a very, very good portion of their investment back. We also have a structure set up with some of our, or particularly one of our family offices, who have similar mindset as us, which is, holding these assets long term. I mean, what better market, right, than South Florida?
There's no better market. It's the greatest place.
And the barriers to entry are significant. I mean, to build in South Florida is really hard. I see a lot of these, New York guys coming down and buying land and stuff. Now, they're learning that, right? They're learning this is a difficult environment.
It's a small town. Like, we had a New York developer trying to build this big tower next to one of our hotels, and they were looking for all these variances. And I'm like, dude, I just had lunch with the mayor last week. Like, you're trying to bully me, and you're in a high rise in New York City right now. Like, it just doesn't work out like that.
No, it certainly doesn't. And their approach is a little different than ours. I mean, but it's so challenging to do these deals. And quite frankly, for us, we're doing public-private partnerships. I mean, how would that look if I was, working with the city? We utilize certain incentives, and then I turned around, 2 years from completion and sold it for buckets of money. I mean, that's not really.
So are you doing like promote crystallization at all?
Sure. So, yeah. So we have a structure where we partner with certain family office. They'll come in and recap the stack, and then stay in, and then we'll continue to stay on as GP and roll ours in and own it long term. So we do that. But you spend years of your life. You pick out a piece of property, you go through all the brain damage and all the challenges that are involved in development. You finally get it built. Nick and I look at each other, God, that was a lot of work. We want to hold that long term. especially in the market that we're in.
100%. Are you guys managing all these properties once you construct them, or are you farming it out to third parties?
Yeah, currently we're a third party.
How do you find these management companies that you work with?
We only actually currently work with one, a local Fort Lauderdale firm, Castle Residential. We were probably their first or second client in the multifamily rental space. Prior to that, they're the largest, I believe, the largest condominium association management company in the state. But we we're on the forefront with them on the rental side, and so certainly worked with them. We have asset management, in-house asset management. We intensely manage the management company.
And how do you measure if they're doing a good job? What do you look for?
Depending on how my blood pressure is doing at the end of the week, No, listen, we have very high expectations, and we set very, very aggressive goals for ourselves, both as a company, but also individually with our employees. We're very, very aggressive in goal setting, and we hold ourselves to a very high standard, and we hold them to a very high standard too. And sometimes that puts a lot of pressure on them, and I can tell you, it's probably not. We might not be their favorite client at certain times, but we're involved, and we want to make sure that we get it right. These public-private partnerships and dealing with folks that are in need for this type of housing, it's incredibly important that we do it right. And so there's a lot of pressure on us. Therefore, there's a lot of pressure on the management company to do a good job.
Right, because the public portion of this will hear about it if you guys screw it up, and then they won't give you another deal, right? Goes back to the relationships.
We get phone calls all the time because they know it. So, and sometimes it's not found, right? Like sometimes it's just some ticked off tenant, and she's upset about something, and she writes the mayor or the commissioners, telling them how what bad people we are and everything. But absolutely, I mean, we want people to have a good experience, and certainly by virtue of our public-private partnership structure, we want to make sure that our management company is held to that same level that we're holding ourselves, and if they were here, they would probably say that that's pretty accurate.
I'm probably going to get canceled for saying this, but my sister lived in a building in Boston, and there was some portion of that building that was, I don't know what it was, subsidized housing or something. And I was in one of the public amenities, and like all these people were like coming in, like getting coffee in this room. Like, geez, it looks like a bunch of homeless people like are in your building. I don't understand what's going on. And she's like, no, this is the affordable housing. And I think it was like very, 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 very low income mixed with very high income.
Yeah.
That seems to be different from what you're doing. Yeah. But still, how do you blend the amenities and the expectations with someone spending $5,000 a month with someone else spending $2,000 a month? And maybe there's not much of a difference there, and that's how you do it versus, what it's in some of these other cities, which seems kind of strange.
Yeah. So what you're probably talking about is inclusionary housing, which is by virtue, going to be your low, or very low income folks. So it's, we don't do the low income housing. Like I said, it's a huge need, and there's groups out there doing a terrific job at it. But ours are generally moderate to middle income. So these are actually folks that are living in market rate communities right now. They're just either in a roommate situation or they're spending 60% of their income on housing. So these are folks that are accustomed to the amenities, they're accustomed to the quality finishes, they're accustomed to the level of service. So we better give it to them. Our job is to just give it to them at a fair price. And so, our number one thing with mixed income housing is to give everybody the same level of experience, the same quality of finish, the same amenities, and all that. Everybody coexists in the building. Nobody knows who makes what. And honestly, that's why people live in an urban environment. I always
You want to mix it up.
I always tell people, listen, if you want to live where everybody makes within a couple $1,000s of each other, and there's plenty of cul-de-sac communities that are perfect for you.
Yep.
If you want to live in a city, you thrive off of the diverse nature of that city. And the fact that not everybody is the exact same, and there's unique things to do and unique people to do it with. And I think that's something that we embrace. And our goal is to give that level of experience to those folks, and really have everybody exist in the same building without there being these are these people and those are those people. I can tell you right now, if you go to any of our projects, nobody knows who's getting a break, and nobody, unless they're running around bragging that they're getting a discount on market rent.
It's an awesome place to leave it. I ask all the guests on the podcast the same closing question, and that is, what is your favorite hotel?
Dalmar, of course.
Awesome. You're the first one to say that.
Hey, listen, I will tell you this, and this is genuine. The bar at the Terrace Grill on the first floor is one of my favorite bars in the city, if not my favorite bar. You guys did a terrific job designing that. You almost feel like you're in New York. I love everything about it. And whenever I get an opportunity, I'm in there having a drink. So
thank you. Well, you're a VVIP for life. An interesting fact on the Dalmar. So the Dalmar is a 4-diamond hotel, downtown Fort Lauderdale. It's really our only boutique lifestyle hotel. The Ritz on the beach just lost its 4-diamond status.
Oh, really? Wow.
And it's a competitor of ours. So the Dalmar is doing something right, and I'm proud of those guys, and you're going to be a VIP for life. So thanks very much.
You hit the market right on that, because I'll tell you, there wasn't that type of option in the downtown. And as Fort Lauderdale grows and we become a real city, which we're a real city.
Right.
You made the right bet. And
now the question is, for us, the Ritz still, smokes us in rate. They're on the beach.
Yes.
It's a Ritz. People, know that. Now our service standards might be higher according to, AAA 4-diamond. But what we have to do as a city of Fort Lauderdale is make the downtown 95% as compelling as the beach, so that we can get the rates almost 90% of where the beach is at. And I think that's where things are going. If you look at Del Rey, West Palm, I can't tell you how many deals I passed on in West Palm, and I'm now kicking myself because that is like, Palm Beach Island became ultra luxury.
Yep.
West Palm is now ultra luxury.
That's
and
right.
I was like, who else would stay here? But
yeah, it's incredible what's
happening.
happening.
Hit it. I missed it.
It's exciting. I'll tell you, there's probably no place that's going to experience the amount of growth and transformation in downtown West Palm Beach in the next 10 years.
So you think that's your biggest bet in Florida right now?
I would say it's our most exciting for sure. That city and what's going on, and the folks that are there and the leadership is just all lining up to really transform that city. It's going to be remarkable to watch, and we're happy to be a part of it.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thanks for having me. It's been fun.
It was fun.
All right.
Hey everyone, it's Jake here. Thanks again for joining me on this conversation. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Lastly, don't forget to follow me on Twitter @JWurzak. I'll see you in the next episode.
Jake Wurzak is the founder and CEO of Dove Hill Capital Management. All opinions expressed by Jake and his guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Dove Hill Capital Management. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not reflect or represent real estate, financial, or investment advice.